My name is Laura Kurek. I'm the mother of Benjamin Kurek. Ben had GRIN2B, and he passed away in September of 2021. He was 3 years old, 3 years, 2 months, and 5 days old when he passed. And this past Tuesday, we celebrated what would have been his 6th birthday. It has been a very excruciating few years without him, but I'm really honored to be able to share this with all of you. So let's hope I can get through this, because I've not really done anything like this before. All right, let's see. Okay, so Ben was the first child for my husband, Max, and I. He has 2 little sisters, Brooke, who is now 4.5, and Avery, who's 2.5. I was actually 6 months pregnant with Avery when Ben passed, so she never got to meet him, but you can see from the picture, he had lots of snuggles with her from the outside. Brooke was his biggest fan, always wanted to help with all of his care, loved being around him, still lives on in her mind like he's never been gone. So she's been a big light through all of this. All right, so before I go too deep into everything, I did kind of want to say something about choosing to stand up here and tell his story to all of you. I would talk about Ben literally anytime, any place, to anyone at any opportunity I had. So when I was given this opportunity, it was a no-brainer for me that I would do it. But the people that I'm most hesitant to tell this story to are all of you in this room. I don't want to scare you or make you worry about your kids any more than you already do. But I know the reality is that me standing up here talking about it isn't going to be the first time you've thought about it. And Ben was very, very medically complex. It was much more than just a developmental disability. I know having a child with a condition so obscure puts a lot of different kinds of fear inside of you, especially when you keep hearing about another child passing, and another, and another, and another, and another, and another. That's 6 of our GRIN2B kids that have passed away that we know of. When we got his diagnosis, we were told that it wasn't fatal, but I kind of think we need to start reconsidering that a little bit, especially in the medically complex children. I'm not going to go really deep into the whole diagnosis journey with him. I knew pretty much immediately from the first few days of him being born that something was going on. Mm-hmm. It took until he was about 4 months for a doctor to take my concerns seriously. And then after that, he was hospitalized for 11 days trying to figure out what was going on, and starting genetic testing. These are just kind of a few quotes that have always stuck with me that I heard from different doctors. And the biggest one is the one at the bottom. When he was admitted for 10 days, losing weight, failure to thrive, a doctor told me that I just needed to go home and get some rest, and it was just in my head. So going from hearing that to now having a child who's not here anymore, still is really difficult to think about. So I know the feeling of, at the beginning stages of feeling so dismissed, and I thought maybe I was just the crazy one, but I really wish that would have been the truth. So we got his diagnosis just after he turned 1 through the whole exome sequencing. There's his variant. It's a loss of function. There are other children with his same variant that aren't medically complex like he is. So these are kind of the main things that we dealt with in terms of his day-to-day life. He threw up constantly. We eventually realized he had pyloric stenosis, he had motility studies, and a lot of his symptoms were GI related. The chronic constipation, he actually ended up, he ended up getting an ileostomy because he could not have a bowel movement on his own ever. He initially got an NG tube, changed to a G tube, changed to a GJ tube, a lot of feeding difficulties. He had really he was very hypotonic, so not much support. He couldn't sit up, barely hold his head up. So after he got his diagnosis, somehow things kind of started to get worse. He was very tall and thin, like most of our kids are, and really struggled to gain weight. So on his second birthday, he was admitted to the hospital and had an NG placed. They essentially were just looking at the numbers on the scale, wanted to pump him full of nutrients. It just made things worse. He started vomiting more. The constipation issues worsened. We had to do rectal irrigations every single day, but he would still be admitted for a bowel obstruction at least once a month. So the vomiting was one of the huge things that affected our life. We couldn't do anything. We couldn't go anywhere because he was just always throwing up. So obviously countless EEGs. I did kind of want to point out too, like the January 20th picture, that is right before he had his G-tube placed, and then the August one about 6 months later, and you can see that even though we're pumping him full of stuff, not gaining weight. So just kind of looking back on it now, it seemed like it was more focused on him actually gaining weight, which with our kids, I don't think is really the goal. It's just to keep them nourished. Just thought that was kind of interesting. So one admission, we'd been in the hospital for a few days, gone in because of vomiting and screaming and neurostorms. He would scream for hours on end with no reason why. So one of our admissions, we had been in the hospital for a few days and nothing was changing, nothing was helping. I just wanted to take him home because that's what we deal with at home every day anyway. But they wouldn't let us leave because they didn't know what was going on. At that point, I had asked to consult with the palliative care team, and they took one look at him and were astounded that no one had ever suggested he be on palliative before, not because he was dying or they didn't think he was dying, but because he was just in such agony and suffering. So after that, we were able to go home and we started seeing hospice at home. It sounds bad and it's a very difficult decision to make, but it ended up being the best decision we could have ever possibly made for him. They were willing to try unconventional things that no one else would be willing to. Our lives completely changed for a few months. They started him on Haldol for vomiting, and he stopped throwing up. He just completely stopped. after all that time, the one medication, and then he stopped. So we were getting a little bit of normalcy back in our life. Ben was actually really happy, and we had a few months of really quality time with him that I believe we would not have otherwise had if we didn't start with hospice. So, $1 million question, what happened? Something happened in the beginning of August that changed him. He went from the best point in his life to the worst, and we couldn't figure out why. He'd become less responsive. He was having more neurostorms and hour-long screaming episodes. He was either sleeping all day or not sleeping at all. That's a picture of him going to his first day of school. In his wheelchair, you can see he's just completely passed out. He made it to his second day of school, and then never made it back. At that point, he had been awake for 2 days straight without sleeping a minute. And he was just acting completely different. So we brought him in for another admission, which, you don't think much of it at this point. We were constantly there. This time was different. They couldn't get him out of the state he was in, and they couldn't get him to fall asleep. Test after test came back normal. They thought he might have delirium from not sleeping and recommended we put him in a medically induced coma for a few days to see if that would help. It took them 3 days and much more sedative than they expected to finally get him to go to sleep. He was out of it for about 3 days before they started reducing the medication for him to wake back up. And the second he woke back up, it was all the same. He was still screaming. The only other option they gave us at that point was to intubate him with the understanding that he may not recover because of how weak he was. After 12 days inpatient, we made the choice to bring him home and follow up with hospice. The night that we brought him home, he didn't tolerate any of his feeds. He couldn't have a drink of water without agonizing screaming. And at this point, we realized we were keeping him here for ourselves, not for him. We had the talk with hospice and made a plan for his comfort. We stopped force-feeding him. We left the hospital September 13th, and that picture on the right is his last day ever in the hospital, which obviously very sad, but it also makes me happy because he doesn't have to be there anymore. We left the hospital September 13th, and for the next 9 days, we held him so close. We were able to tell him how sorry we were for the unfairness that his life was, and be able to spend time. He was able to spend time with his sister and family and friends. He passed away in our arms on September 22nd at 5:36 a.m. No one knows what changed or why, and no one knew how to fix it. The amount of blame and guilt that we hold as parents for what happened is so heavy because we have no other answer, just to blame ourselves. It's not okay. We deserve answers. We deserve research. And these kids deserve to live a long, happy life. When is that going to happen? How can we make it happen? Ben did his absolute best for the GRIN2B community while he was here, and he continues to do that even though he's gone. He donated his brain to Autism BrainNet. He desperately wants to help his friends, your kids, to not have to suffer like he did. I hope I'm making him proud when I tell his story, because the pride I have from him being my son is insurmountable. I made a promise to him before he died that I would never stop fighting for him. And me standing here today is an attempt at that. I want to say thank you for to the GRIN2B Foundation for giving me this opportunity. And it's such a privilege to tell you all about Ben. It's such a privilege to be here in a room together with so many people that share a common goal. I do want to end on a high note. Although Ben is gone, he's never far away. He lives on in our lives and always will. He had a smile that could melt your heart. The softness of his hair was one of his most frequent compliments. His good days were full of so much laughter and playfulness. Ben has impacted so many lives, and we are so grateful that he was with us while he was. But this has to stop. And that's his birthday on Tuesday. And this is what Ben thinks of GRIN. Thank you. Okay, it's a lot. Please don't. Yeah. We'll get like with forever now. But then you get the best. This is the cut. Hey, the best. I am. Like I said, I love talking about him, even the hard stuff. So I'm literally an open book. Working on passing mic for him. Shall I go back up here?
Was there anyone in your life that knew about GRIN2B, like any of the doctors or anybody that you would have had connection with at that time where that would have been able to help you, or were you just sort of out alone in the medical world without any knowledge surrounding GRIN2B?
Mm-hmm. So initially, no, but when we first got his diagnosis, the first thing we found was the GRIN2B Foundation, and there is a group of GRIN2B kids in the Chicagoland area, and we ended up seeing a neurologist that was also seeing another GRIN2B child and a GRIN1 child, I think. So there was a little bit of knowledge, but his case was very different than what he had seen before. So, kind of.
Yeah, we knew about Ben. As I said, I live close to Laura, and I literally went and saw Ben like 3 days before he passed, which is like one of the most amazing and saddest moments of my life, was getting to hold him one last time. But yeah, we tried. We just don't know enough. And it was kind of a atypical presentation of GRIN. Okay, any questions? Oh, we have questions.
Laura, you talked a little bit about some of the things that were frustrating about the way that providers talked to you when Ben was in the hospital. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what things were frustrating for you and what you wish they would have done differently?
Yeah, of course. So initially, I'm a nurse and I worked in mother-baby for a while. I've been around a lot of babies in my life. When Ben was born, I just kind of knew something was different. Didn't want to be the new mom who is worried about everything, so kind of kept it to myself for a little bit. Brought it up to his pediatrician and said it was just colic and just wait it out, nothing to do. Things got worse. At his 3-month appointment, same thing. Oh, still just colic. So we went to a new pediatrician, And she immediately took it more seriously because she saw him, not developing as he should be. The day that we brought him into the emergency room for the first time was Thanksgiving Day, my 30th birthday. He had been screaming for like 8 hours. And up until that point, I had been told, just wait it out. And then we get to the emergency room. And the doctor said, oh, he doesn't look like a normal baby. Something's really wrong with him. So there have been a lot of insensitive comments. I don't expect doctors to be perfect, but I do expect them to have compassion. And we, especially in the beginning, did not get a lot of that. And then towards the end, because he was so medically complex and we were in and out constantly, it kind of even felt like we were dismissed because we were seeing them so often. Like, oh, them again. So, yeah, it was, I think getting the diagnosis at least was validating enough so that we didn't get terrible comments anymore. Still, people say not nice things. No.
Hello. Thank you so much for sharing that. I've heard you a few times, more than a few times, talk about Ben, and every time I feel like I absorb and process a little bit something differently. I had a question about like when he was happy and when he was sad, because I had the privilege of meeting him, and the one thing I remember about him is his beautiful smile. And I know that he had these periods, but I don't even, how did you get through 8 hours of him crying? Was there any indication, or would it just flip just like that?
Occasionally, you could tell if he was getting irritated and irritable, and you could potentially distract him out of it. Otherwise, when he would get in these screaming episodes, it was just time. It just took time. And when I had asked the new pediatrician at what point should we bring him to the emergency room, because this is just what our everyday life is like, she said, when you as parents can't handle it anymore. So that's kind of what we did after that 8-hour stint. Couldn't handle watching him like that anymore. But yeah, it would just day to day, hour to hour. When I was looking through pictures for this, I watched a video of one of his neurostorms, and it was bad. And then I looked at the next picture, and it was like 25 minutes later, and he's got the biggest smile on his face. No rhyme or reason. Wish we knew. Wish we knew how to help him while it was happening. It's a very, very desperate feeling to want to help your kid and not be able to. But yeah, definitely just very random. He did not have seizures. He had an abnormal EEG, but at one point too, they thought maybe it was him having seizures during these episodes, but it was confirmed that it wasn't. Okay.
I wanted to thank you for sharing your story, because not as a mom, but like as a physician, like I'm traumatized by how you were treated. And I promise you that I think about that when I'm with my patients. So please continue to share his story, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Anisha.